Hi, welcome back to Journey Forward with Joree Rose. I am really looking forward to my conversation today with Hilary Hendel. And I think this is going to be a really timely talk that many of you guys are going to find so much value. And we're talking about how to manage our emotions. So Hilary, welcome to the show today. And please introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you're doing and what your passion is in your work.
Thank you, Joree. I'm happy to be talking to you right now, especially with what's going on in current events and in the world today. I am originally trained as originally trained as a dentist. Several years later, went back to school to become a psychotherapist. And
Oh, that was a big switch.
yeah, that was. But there was a 10-year gap of trying to find myself in between. That's a whole other story that I won't bore anybody with. The only reason, the dental part is relevant actually is in my work with what we're going to be talking about with emotions today, because emotions are physical. And as a dentist, I had a medical education with the medical students at Columbia. So I know a lot about the body and physiology that really sort of helped me with kind of my decision to kind of bring this particular model of emotion education to the public. But in a nutshell, I'm a practicing psychotherapist in New York City. And while I was originally trained classically as a psychoanalyst, and my father was a psychiatrist and my parents were into Freud, and I kind of grew up in a psychological household, I stumbled on a way of working back in 2003 that for my own mental and emotional health, in my first encounter with this model and this science and this work, was like one epiphany after another.
Wow.
And it was all about learning things about emotions that I was never taught in all my wonderful schooling and training. And it was a conspicuous absence, for one. And two, the emotion education that I had and that is available within a small group of academics and psychotherapists who practice in this way of working called AEDP and ISTDP. All these acronyms are for experiential short-term psychotherapies. But what I ended up doing a decade later is my original pet peeve that I had never had this information and that my family never had it and my friends and and people at large never had it, really grew into a moral outrage that our culture really needs to educate us about emotions. Because as I was teaching people about emotions one-on-one in my practice, and my colleagues were, and people were getting better where they weren't really getting as better and as feeling as calm from other methods that focus more on kind of what you're thinking and insights.
Right.
This is in contrast. It's not, instead, it's bringing in this whole idea of the body, which in California they knew about many years ago, but in New York City, anything that reeked of emotions and experience in the body was like new age BS, and it really wasn't. But I think the science had to catch up. So
absolutely, and I love that we're bringing this to the topic right now, because emotions are something that every single person manages, and we're, like you said, we're not giving the tools. Right. And so much of the basis of therapy is just, well, let's process it and let's maybe figure out what the trigger was or where it's coming from, but it's trying to solve something that sometimes isn't fixable. Because emotions are going to continue to come up. And one of the things that I've done recently in my work is talking about what I call disaster anxiety. And I talked about it. I was actually on live news and having parents being able to talk to kids about fears of the California wildfires.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm bringing this information out now around the coronavirus, as we're going to talk about. But, the simple fact of just everyone's fear and anxiety, it's palpable. And yet, the last thing anyone's going to do when you say calm down is actually calm down.
Right.
And it's going to negate the opportunity for actually empathically and compassionately connecting around the emotional experience.
Yes, I'm totally with you. And I think, there's something about a balance between Well, one, having tools like when you can recognize an emotion and name it and validate it, it does something to the brain that the nervous system likes. This idea of putting words on an experience. So maybe one of the things we could get into is, in that moment of anxiety and really discerning anxiety from fear and how you do that. Can we start to tune in as opposed to move away, as our society really teaches us from the time that we're born, is that if you feel something uncomfortable, move away from it.
Right.
And that's not a bad strategy, but if it's the only strategy, it's a disservice to ourselves. So it's kind of this blend. I was writing something this morning about kind of, when I get, for me with the coronavirus, and I'm based in New York City, where it's kind of amping up a little bit, and now in Connecticut, where it hasn't yet, but people are getting ready, is these sort of spikes of anxiety that come up, or spikes of fear, where it makes sense. You read something in the news and it activates the fight or flight centers in the limbic system, right, which are unconscious. It just happens. So we can't stop the emotions from happening, but there are tools and ways to manage them better.
Right.
And, just for people out there to know that this book that I wrote on a tool that I adapted from, I didn't invent anything new. I learned about a model in my training to become an experiential psychotherapist that is a triangle. And I really just thought this is a great tool that you could start teaching people in high school. And it's called the change triangle. And
yeah, please tell more. I know it's,
as we talk about it,
as I've been reading more into the change triangle, and I know that my fiance John has spoken with you, and he's been integrating this work. It's been beautiful, because partly I think having a framework to name and to see where we're at and begin to label and just understand our process of our habits, our patterns around our emotions.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I see it. At the very least, if you understand something and learn a little bit about emotions, they get a little bit more demystified. It's not going to make them less painful when you experience them, but it's one thing to have a mysterious pain, and it's a very another thing to say, I know why I'm feeling this. I can name it. I have some tools to work with it. I have some skills and choices to make about how to try to help myself in a variety of ways. That brings down anxiety incredibly.
Yeah.
And so the goal in teaching the change triangle, which I don't think we need to go into necessarily, because I am everywhere on the internet and on social media explaining the basics of the change triangle, and including my website, which maybe you'll put up.
Yeah,
which
we'll
has
have links to that for sure.
Tons of free resources to learn the basics. But that's the tool. So if people are listening and curious, they can Google that, and maybe I'll refer to it as we talk, because it's a model.
Like just a 1-minute description of it, because I think it would be really valuable to just kind of name it, and then we don't have to go further into it, but just as a basic framework for maybe as if it comes up, further on in our conversation.
Yeah, so you basically just imagine an upside down triangle. The point of it would be superimposed on your body, and then it would kind of come up, and the top of it would be, let's say, somewhere between your head and your shoulders.
Okay.
And on the 3 points of the triangle, which we're moving around all the time on a daily level and on a macro level throughout our lives, kind of in a more broader way, we're moving around it. The point of the triangle is the core emotions, which the reason they're in the body is because core emotions are triggered in the brain: anger, sadness, fear, disgust, joy, excitement, and sexual excitement. And these are pre-wired programs that have evolved for hundreds of thousands of, as long as sort of mammals have been around. So they're meant to be adaptive. We have emotions for a reason. They're a compass to tell us if something is dangerous or something is safe. Do we want to move away from something? Do we need to fight back? Do we need to lean into something because it's pleasurable and nurturing for us? And so when the environment happens, as is happening now, it's going to connect through our 5 senses and set off core emotions. And when the core emotions are triggered, they're going to set off a host of physiological responses in our body that ready us for some action that's adaptive. That's exactly the purpose of an emotion. It triggers something, it makes the body react. Now, if the body is allowed to react and then come to a place of safety or to move through the wave of a core emotion, which is one of the ways that core emotions behave, they're wave-like. They come, they tell us what we have to do, and then so we feel kind of agitated, or we feel them, and then we calm down. But what happens in our society is we're really told through modeling and through societal rules, like emotions are for weak people, or we're supposed to control our emotions, which we're not. That's a myth. We can't. We can only kind of manage what we do with them once we have them. So that when a core emotion is triggered, we're sort of at a crossroads to, if we block them, we get anxious, and we block them with these inhibitory emotions that are on one corner of the triangle. And the inhibitory emotions are anxiety and guilt and shame. All of these inhibitory emotions serve to push down core emotions, to please others, to get along with others, to fit in,
or
with
even just to
others.
function through our day.
To function through our day,
yeah.
Exactly. And then when you have this kind of swirling group of core emotions and inhibitory emotions in our bodies, it feels really bad. And so we move to the top left corner of the triangle, which is defenses, which is not in a pejorative or negative term. It's really anything we do that protects us from feeling uncomfortable. It's to help us avoid pain. And the defenses we use are really infinite. I have a whole list of them on my website, but they range from little micro kind of defenses, like shrugging off a compliment or rolling our eyes when we don't like something, to reaching for a drink when we're uncomfortable, or a drug, to ruminating in our head. Like anytime that you're obsessing about something, you can ask yourself, you can first notice you're obsessing, and then ask myself, what am I feeling? What emotions are driving these thoughts? Because they're usually driven by anxiety.
Yeah.
But the change triangle tells us that when we recognize our defenses and we recognize our anxiety, guilt, or shame, it's a signal to also look for, what am I feeling? What core emotions am I feeling that are driving these inhibitory emotions and defenses? And it just gives us something to do to feel better.
Yeah, I love the visual. I'm a very visual person,
Yeah.
and I think very visually in terms of our processes. And so I love the visual it provides. And I think it can help, like I said, map, where we are, where we're stuck, even just with awareness of our pattern, just so we know, oh, that makes sense. This is why I've always done it like this. And I can kind of trace that around. So as we bring that model into what feels like this collective amped up energy right now in the world, in which it's hard to differentiate fear from just a very practical, like, okay, this is a very scary time and there's a lot of unknowns, and how do I manage real fears from just thoughts that are scary, right? When do I know? Like, I think that's a question I get a lot from clients, is like, how do I know when it's time to take action, or when it's time to just say, okay, that's just a fear, that's just anxiety, and right now I'm safe? I mean, my mindset, as mindfulness as being my framework in core practice, is to, like you said, name it, acknowledge it, allow it to exist without judgment, give it space. As you observe that thought or emotion in that space, you become less over identified with it, and in that space you have choice to respond, and you've got room to breathe in between, allowing it to just settle a little bit. And with this pandemic and the fear it's inciting, it's sometimes hard to know to differentiate, can I just let it settle, or do I need to go take action? Which I think then the taking action fuels more fear at times, rather than calming down. I mean, I was food shopping this morning, and the lines were like it was the day of Thanksgiving. The shelves are literally empty. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
So it's hard not to pick up on that energetic fear and anxiety around us, even if I'm on a more regulated, center, because it's palpable.
Exactly. Everybody is vibrating at a higher frequency of anxiety. It's normal. And so it's just, I think it's using these tools throughout the day and being able to feel calm enough. uh, you know, again, the sort of the change triangle is a starting point to see, like a map, like, you know, where are you? That's what I ask people. I ask myself, where are you on the change triangle right now? And if you're in defenses, you need to move down to core emotions. If you're in core emotions, you need to name them, feel them in your body, and see what the impulse is telling you to do. And the nutty thing about fear in something like this, and why it's mostly anxiety, is that there's, unless you are imminently ill and on the way to the hospital, then the fear is going to is about it's about the future. Really, it's about worrying, and it doesn't even have to be rational. I keep reminding myself when I get these jolts throughout the day. That's sort of been my process, is like, I'm fine, and then I maybe hear something or I have a thought and it jolts my anxiety, and then I kind of have my litany of things that I remind myself, like, one, thank goodness children aren't dying from this. I mean, above all, and, you know, really, you know, under children and people under 60 are okay. And that's a great thing, because I think if I had to worry about my 4 children who are in their 20s, that would be unbearable, be really hard.
So I think one of the things you're mentioning is something that I talk to my clients about as well, is look to the gratitude, right? Because we know that our brains have that negativity bias, and without awareness, we're going to default to that negativity bias. And the more we ruminate on that negative, the bigger it becomes. But with that awareness that we're stuck in that pattern of focusing on that negative or that fear or that anxiety, we've got to be able to shift the attention somewhere. And gratitude is always a great place to shift. And one of the things that I talk a lot about is shifting to self-compassion. So it might just be the self-compassion to say, no wonder I'm really fearful right now. This makes sense. This isn't an irrational thought. This is a rational thought. And I can have compassion that I'm afraid about this. And not but, you know, allow the but to turn to an and, because it allows both to be true. And let me reality check. I think this is helpful for people too, to get out of that spiral of fear and anxiety, is reality check. Okay, what can I do that I can take action on, that I feel proactive to help keep me safe, secure, calm, you know, for myself and the people around me? Because I find sometimes taking action can alleviate the rumination.
And I think that's why everyone's in the grocery store, because something
Exactly.
you can do is and the news said, you know, it's good to have a couple of weeks of food if you're sick and you can't leave the house. Good idea. So that's exactly right. And sometimes, you know, I like what you said again, you know, about gratitude. That's important. Sometimes that's hard. I like that you added that, but I think sometimes, you know, calming down enough to use rational thought. So it's like, what can I do? What can I do? And what is the actual danger right now? And to who? And really slowing down, you know, when I teach people to work with emotions, slowing, because anxiety speeds us up. And so what does that mean to slow down? In reality, it kind of means to just, I teach people to just feel your feet on the floor. Stop, right? Just stop moving for a second. Take 5 or 6 deep belly breaths, which is a kind of breathing that is so helpful, where you're shifting from this kind of hyperventilating high breathing into this kind of letting your belly, you can't see my belly, but the idea is, we're always told as women to hold our bellies in, but this time you let your belly come out, and then you blow on hot soup, like when you're blowing on hot soup, to use your lips as a tuning fork as you tune in, to get the airflow in a way. And this is a practice, I think, over a lifetime, but after a decade of practicing breathing, it's so specific, where I have a feeling that I don't like, I fill my whole body with air, what it feels like, and slowly release as I tune in to get that right feeling. And what that is you're really compressing the vagus nerve, which slows down the heart rate, slows down the breathing. And again, I have instructions for that on, I have a toolbox section on HilaryJacobsHendel.com, but I think you can Google deep belly breathing, and there's a lot of people that are sharing that. But to slow down for even a minute
Yeah.
can be like a different world. And then you can begin to ask yourself, like, what is my acute danger right now? Really nothing. I don't think very many people are in acute danger except for very old people who are sick.
Yeah. One of
Um,
the things I
yeah.
like to remind people too is that, that flaw in our design of the brain is that the brain's can, like you said, produce that physiological response with fear. So we're going to get that sympathetic nervous system's activated of the increased heart rate and that feeling of tension or tightness in our body or the constricted breathing. And I always like to remind people, when we were cavemen, this was designed to help keep us safe and to increase our survival. And the brain doesn't know the difference between that real bear in the cave or a shadow we perceive as a bear. It's going to have the same physiological response. And so this is where I like to teach people that awareness of even just a simple thought can trigger that same physiological response as if the real threat. So we've got to have that awareness. Oh, look, that was just a thought, right? That's just a fearful thought. And right now I'm safe. And I think it's holding space for all that's coming up with some that awareness and that compassion of this is human to have this response right now, not to
Mm-hmm.
judge myself. Why am I acting like this? Why am I overreacting? Just the awareness of this is a human response to have fear and anxiety. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
bad thing, but what we choose to do with it, we can strengthen those skills and those tools around.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's, like you said, with practice, it gets a little bit easier and a little bit easier.
Yeah, all of these things are practices that get better over time because you really sort of customize the tools for your nervous system is one way to think about it.
Where do you see, and I'm curious because I could see it kind of showing up in some different ways. Where does depression show up on that change triangle model?
Yeah, depression I would put on the defensive corner, and it's
Even though a core emotion of sadness,
right. So depression and sadness are two very different things,
right?
right? So
And I want to clarify this for people
yeah,
because I think the word depression gets overused,
yes,
which I think is a really helpful thing to separate out, which is why I want to bring awareness to that.
yeah. So we feel sad when we suffer losses. That's the evolutionary call for sadness.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to feel sadness over losses so that we feel connection and attachment, which is beneficial. That's humans have survived and thrived because of their, because we're wired for connection and people, the group and two heads are better than one, so to speak. So we need to be connected to each other, which means when we lose people we love, we feel loss and sadness and grief. And even when we lose objects we love, or you lose your keys, or anything like that, loss leads to sadness. Depression, and they can feel similarly that heaviness in your body, just the way fear and anxiety and excitement can feel actually
Right.
all similar. Um, Depression is a defense because when I treat depression, we're helping people. There's like one of the hallmarks of depression is a loss of vitality and a loss of energy. It's like a massive shutdown because there's too much feeling generally
Right.
from trauma. There's a genetic component to all symptoms. Why does one person get depressed and another person develop ADD and another person develop OCD and another person develop addiction? So we have the genetics and the new field of epigenetics, which is how the environment is
Mm-hmm.
affecting our genes. But emotion work helps all symptoms because
Mm-hmm.
at the root of it, we have with depression, often it's large amounts of anger from being neglected or abused or bullied or things that have happened to us since childhood and life. These feelings are coursing up for expression because feelings want, above all, to be validated,
Mm-hmm.
and so that the energy can move through you. That not the energy in the woo-woo sense, although that probably applies, but energy in the actual biophysiologic energy that the body produces, which allows your heart to beat and your legs to run to safety. So when you are triggered to fear, a ton of energy is mobilized in the body so that you can run away. And that may be the impulse. In a way, quarantining goes well with fear because people
Yeah.
want to huddle together and feel safe and warm and cozy. And
Yeah.
the flip side is for people who are isolated, it's very scary and brings more depression. And so we have to reach out through video, through phone,
Right.
um, more than texting, because humans need the human voice to hear. That's
Mm-hmm.
soothing, whereas a text won't be as soothing. So pick up the
Right.
phone and call your grandmother and your grandfather and say hello. That would be it's a good time to do that type of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I think, I've seen a lot show up on some different email streams that I have of different therapy groups that I'm in, talking about how to help with this social distancing right now,
Yeah.
of this idea of quarantining. And yet we know that when we are isolated, our resiliency goes down,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore our health. And so there's this really interesting dynamic around this, fear of social isolation and what this can do, and the domino effect of isolation. So I think it's a really important reminder that
Mm-hmm.
even if you are in a place that ends up getting quarantined, to do your best to stay connected. And this is why, something like FaceTime, or like you and I are doing right now, just through Zoom, being able to see face to face, because it doesn't feel like you're across the country. I feel like I'm sitting, on the couch next to you having a conversation, and that feels connected, and that feels really good.
Yes, it does.
So
It
I
really.
think it's a great reminder of, through all of this anxiety that, again, is palpable and it's an unknown. And, I feel like it's a really helpful tool to reach out to others in the same vein and just say, hey, I'm really kind of feeling disconnected. I would love to FaceTime you. I would love to see you if I can, and go for a walk if that's possible, and not get more isolated, which can lead to some of those deeper, harder emotions to manage when you're all alone.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what are some other tips and tools, people who maybe are dealing with people who are sick right now, and that unknown, do you advise for helping manage? Just, it's the unknown. And I think that's the hardest part, because we don't have a roadmap for all of this that's going on in our culture and world and society right now. So what are some other tips and tools that you think people could really use right now in managing any emotions that are coming up?
Yeah, and again, so you could say, oh, Hilary, like lead me more to the sort of philosophical, intellectual approach of these things, or lead me to how to work with emotions. And I do both in my personal life and as I teach people. So which one do you
Let's
want?
start with the tangible piece.
Mm-hmm.
I think, some people, if they don't have maybe some more resources to go to the philosophical route, and we need some tangible, I'm scared right now, I'm overwhelmed, I'm anxious, my kids are anxious.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I talk a lot about, is how parents can talk to kids about this stuff, because kids are often going to get a lot of information from either social media or their friends, and they're going to turn to us to calm them down and to remind them that we're okay and we're safe and here's what we're doing. But it's going to be hard if the parent is not role modeling that. So it's going to be hard for parents to, give kids that comfort when they're not feeling it themselves. And so I think we need some tangible reminders.
Yeah. And yeah, I just was writing something on Twitter about that, about a reminder that anxiety is contagious, and emotions are contagious, and they're meant to be, again. So that's that empathy piece. So, but we have to be careful as parents that we're not increasing the traumatic stress from all of this. And it is traumatic for most people, because it's an existential threat. But so I guess the main kind of ways that I think about it is, one, not to be ahead of your kid because of your own anxiety. Don't offer information that they're not asking for. So
That's always a good reminder.
yes,
Whether
yeah,
they're asking about sex, just answer the
yeah,
question.
yeah, exactly. And wait for them to ask, and just say, the most important thing, because nonverbal communication trumps the the verbal communication, viscerally, right? So
Yeah.
we've got a conscious mind, but most of us are operating on these sort of implicit levels. You could call it unconscious, you could call it implicit. So just slowing down. I cannot overstate that enough, that anxiety revs us up. We move faster. I'm even noticing myself, we talk faster, and I'm always trying to remember to slow myself down, to kind of sit back. And with kids, if you can just slow down and sit on the floor and play some games, and then, and just say, if you have any questions about what's going on, you can totally ask. Mommy and daddy feel safe, we're okay, and we're just trying to be good citizens by staying inside so we're not spreading this germ. And that would be the approach, and just trying to stay engaged in fun activities. It's really hard to be a parent now with young kids, especially when they're not going home, when they're not going to school. And
my kids are at school right now, but it likely won't happen in the next couple of weeks. I mean,
how old
there's
are
a
your
really
children?
I'm sorry.
How many children, and how old are they?
I have 2 daughters, 14 and 16.
Yeah.
And, we're getting daily updates from the school district, and there's a pretty good chance that school will eventually end up being canceled for who knows how much amount of time. And, the trickle effect of, well, what's the impact of that? Will it be virtual school? Will I have to go into summer? How will that ruin our summer camp plans? My daughter, who's going to be gone for 8 weeks over the summer, what if she can't go to camp? The implications are potentially big, and we just don't know.
Right.
And so I recognize if I respond with anxiety and fear, they're going to take that in. And if I respond, that's a possibility, and we don't know. And so I will just take it as it comes. Right. There was years ago that it was a time in my life where I was really turning to mindfulness and needed some tools and needed a framework to get through my challenges, and where I was stuck and managing all my thoughts and emotions. And I had ordered a new book off Amazon. And even though it was brand new, and it was a mindfulness book, even though it was brand new, it was used. And there was handwritten notes that I thought was the universe talking directly to me, because that's what it really felt like. But it became a mantra for me to get through every difficult thing that I didn't think I could get through. And the words that were written in this book said, wait to worry, live in the present, and breathe. And it literally, Hilary, became a mantra of mine. And just the wait to worry, that in and of itself was kind of mind-boggling to me, because I had, prior to that, been in a habit of worrying and believing the fears to be true when they were often never materialized.
Right.
But the wait to worry, and I think that's a really great reminder right now with this pandemic, is yes, there's some scary stats out there, and wait to worry. Because taking on that now is not going to serve you, nor your children, nor your own health.
Yes.
So wait to worry, live in the present, and breathe. It's really that powerful and really that simple. Easier said than done, don't get me wrong, but that's why I like to offer these mantras as reminders. So if you start to feel that physiology amp up and you start to feel those emotions bubble, and just breathe, okay, wait to worry.
Right, those are very wise words. Worry is a really interesting state, I guess I would call it, and something I've given a lot of thought about. And worry generally doesn't do anything. But I think that a part of the mind, when you can't do anything, worry sort of acts like something that can be done, sort of to let me be upset before something blindsides me. But I remember, should I tell you a story of me? I was in psychoanalysis at the time before I switched to becoming an AEDP therapist and having AEDP therapy, which is this kind of work that I do with emotions. But I was talking to my analyst, and I was worried so much about my teenage daughter. And it dawned on me that sort of my worry was a way to keep connected to her. And it was almost like a magical thinking that if I worried, I was connected to her and I was keeping her safe. And then one day when I wasn't worrying, I got this call that, I won't go into it, but it was teenage stuff and it was worrisome. And I remembered in that moment, wow, I wasn't worrying. Something bad happened. She's okay now, and this is a decade ago. But I wasn't worrying. Something bad happened, and I handled it. And I'm so glad that I didn't waste that time worrying, because then it would have sort of added insult to injury.
Right.
What's going to happen, we are going to handle. And the point of worry is only, is there something I can do? Like, can I get some rice and beans in the house in case I have to, stay at home for 2 weeks and not go grocery shopping, some staples and whatnot. But other than that, I think it's good to notice I'm worrying. And then again, that's when I work the change triangle. What is really going on? Okay, I'm afraid. Let me validate, I'm afraid. That's the end of the story. I have fear triggered in my body, and it's creating anxiety, and it's making me start to my mind go.
Right.
And that's when, let me slow down, feel my feet on the ground, get engaged. So that's kind of when I was talking about this 2-step process. I'm always validating my emotion. I'm always feeling it in the body. And that's the one thing that I thought AEDP and the change triangle does well, that just plain mindfulness and meditation, even though I know you're in the body, but something about focusing on these, when I'm in session, and let's say you told me you were scared, I would say, Joree, what is it in your body that lets you know you're frightened right now?
Mm-hmm.
If we slow down and scan your body from head to toe and toe to head very slowly, what sensations let you know that you're frightened? Like dropping the storyline, even dropping the emotion, and going purely into physical sensations. And people, it doesn't happen as fast as recalling thoughts. So you really have to give it like 30 seconds, which seems like an eternity, just focusing inside. But then it's like coming out of a fog. You start to notice the sensations. And as you get very familiar with your body and you can stay in your body, it's the surest way to calm your mind. And you can meditate on the physical sensation to allow it to move. And if it's a core emotion, it'll move. You may cry, you may feel if it's fear, you may feel vibration, but core emotions always move, and they always come up and then they settle. That's how you calm a nervous system. Anxiety is different. If you stay with anxiety, it churns. It won't come up and go. And that's the value when you're anxious, of really trying to name the core emotions one by one to see if you can name everything happening.
It's a very vulnerable process. It takes a lot of courage to go in that.
And that's exactly why I write in the book and in the blogs that I write. When I show 7 sessions, I want to show it because, again, it's so much less scary than when you don't have a vicarious sort of look at what it actually looks like. So, if I asked you to tune into your belly to see if you were hungry or not, would you find that scary?
No.
And if I asked you to focus in on a mosquito bite, the itch that a mosquito bite has, and I just asked you to stay with it, even though it's hard not to scratch, would that be scary?
No, but as you said that, all of a sudden I started itching on my leg out of nowhere.
Right. I'm sorry, the power of suggestion. But that becomes the idea that we really can tolerate, like if I bang my knee or stub my toe, it's excruciatingly painful. You feel it and it comes up. It's going to get worse, and then it's going to get better. And that's really what it's like with an emotion. Anger, just because we haven't touched upon that, and there's a lot to be angry about now too, in terms of government preparedness, and not to mention the day-to-day things that piss us off in life. I teach people to work with anger by, again, feeling the energy of the anger in the body, but then using fantasy to see if that anger, not you, no one's an angry person, but we have a program that's separate from us that will trigger anger. and it will pull for energy to come up and out, usually to say something hurtful or to punch or to kick or something like that. We can use fantasy to imagine that. And that's a way to discharge big energies that sort of feel like they're coming out. They're like beyond the confines of our body because they're
Yeah.
pulling for a movement. Same thing with excitement. If we don't use fantasy to kind of see what the excitement wants to do, when it comes up against the confines of our body and kind of ricochets back in, that's what causes anxiety. So we need to figure out ways to move that energy up and out.
And I love that so much, because it really feels like without this, we're just staying stuck, right? So it feels like the way to get through the emotion is to literally allow it to continue to flow, because as soon as we feel it, it's like we tense and we tighten and we constrict.
That's right.
And that we're having no equanimity around it. We're having no ability to just not label it good or bad, or not grasp or cling or push or deny and resist. We're just we need to just allow it. And so much of this is so deeply powerful, and yet just so hard to do, because it's not what we're normally conditioned. And so I'm so glad that we've touched on so many different things today, because I think this is a really ripe time for people to get as many extra reminders and reiterations of ways to manage through whatever's arising for them. And it's, I think so much, what comes to mind is the self-compassion practice, and the self-compassion to, as Kristen Neff defines the 3 components of self-compassion, of kindness to ourselves, the mindfulness and the awareness of what's arising without judgment, but then the common humanity of, I'm not the only one.
I love
Nothing
Kristen.
is wrong with me for feeling these things. And if I can remind myself that's just part of the human experience to feel these core emotions, to recognize I'm going to have these thoughts and defended ways of managing these emotions, or these inhibitory emotions that are going to come up as a result, like there's nothing wrong with me. And I think people start to feel like, well, they look like they're managing better over there. And they're going to be in comparison mind. And yet we don't know what's happening internally, but there's so much judgment, I find, of people feeling their feelings. We're very fearful to do so. And I just want to give the reminder for our listeners to just have compassion for what you're feeling, to not judge yourself or your children or your friends or your family for what they're experiencing. And it's easier said than done, because we've got triggers, we've got patterns, we've got traumas that are going to, instigate them more or less at times. And I'm so glad we're talking about managing emotions specifically right now. And I'm sure that our listeners have had so many opportunities for things as takeaways.
I hope so. And I'm so glad that you just said this last part, because the stance of the AEDP therapist, this type of, and the stance of self-help and working with emotions towards yourself is always approach your emotions, approach everything you find inside with curiosity, with compassion, and as I do in my practice, it's like, can we ask the judging part to just go in the waiting room? Because it's really a defense. We learn to judge ourselves, again, as a way of protecting ourselves originally from someone else judging us. So if I can judge myself before someone else does, and then it just becomes habitual. And so we want to learn to get a little bit of separation between the parts of us that judge, and really ask them to step aside or get curious. I ask people, when they start to judge themselves, can we get to know this part? Can we welcome it for a moment and ask, what's the purpose of the judgment right now?
Yeah.
And you hear all sorts of things. And then when you get to know the judging part, then you can respectfully ask it if it will step outside and not interfere with you getting to honor the emotion coming up. And literally, I say to people in my practice, I know this sounds very hokey, but can you ask that judging part if it's willing to kind of step back?
Yeah.
And then listen for the answer. And if not, then there must be a good reason that this is a very protective defense. And we need to understand you can't let go of a defensive way of being, because it was adaptive at one time, until you provide another equally protective way. And ultimately that comes to be the strength of the self, to be able to say, look, I can look at my feelings and honor them and feel them and not lose myself, that I can stay grounded. And depending on how much trauma a person experienced in childhood and on up, will be a function of whether they can practice that on their own or whether
Yeah.
they'll need another, right? To be in that connection that's an anchor as you're growing your own confidence.
Yeah.
But I did want to say that, can I
Yeah, please.
give me some time? I just wanted to say that for people that are interested in this, and it's okay if you're not, but for people that are interested in emotions, I really took care to write this book, which is called "It's Not Always Depression," as to in a very simple, non-jargony, accessible way to understand and then work with your own emotions. So there's stories that are really kind of nice that are from my practice that people were so sweet to let me to write about, that show exactly how to work this triangle. And it's mindfulness with a map, because
Hmm.
I personally like to know what's going on inside me in a way that I can organize myself. And I think that's what, when I first saw the change triangle at that conference back in 2003, I felt organized, and that really sort of helped me. It was then that I realized that I was anxious my entire life, and that to cover up my anxiety, I just moved and did and made a lot of mistakes because I was moving without listening to myself.
I can relate to that.
And same thing, I went through 2 depressions. I didn't know why I got depressed, except that I was told by a psychiatrist that I was too stressed out, but had to do with fear that I wasn't listening to.
Yeah.
And that no one had told me skills of how to manage fear, or even that fear was normal and that it was triggering my brain and triggering my body, and that I could do these things to calm my body down. And so there's so much that we don't learn in society because we really have a dysfunctional, emotion phobic society.
Yeah. So how can people best find you and your work? I know we'll have all these links in the show notes,
Yeah.
but what someone who's listening and they just want to hear how to best find you.
Yeah, well, so there's 2 things. From the self-help perspective, the book is called It's Not Always Depression, and it's on paperback and hardcover. Random House published it, and it's in the UK, and I don't know how many, if you have listeners all over the world, it's in Chinese, it's in South Korean, it's
Oh,
in
amazing.
Polish, it's in Lithuanian, it's coming in Spanish and Japanese soon. So because this is really, we know that there's a change in the zeitgeist where people are now understanding the neuroscience that it's not that it's all about emotions, but it's about a balance between
Sure.
thoughts and emotions, and that we need to come into more of a balance. That's why there's so much anxiety and depression going on,
Right.
because we're all in our heads, and that's not good for us. So, but then there's tons of free resources on HilaryJacobsHendel.com, or you could Google the Change Triangle, or you could go to the Change Triangle YouTube channel, where I have meditations and how to deep belly breathe, how to come into the body, how to work with child parts by being your own good parent, and lectures on the Change Triangle. And for the therapy part, for people that know that they would benefit, and everybody benefits from therapy. There
Yes.
should not be a stigma anymore. It's like going to gym for the brain, right? We all suffer. We're all neurotic, whatever you want to call it. It's just normal. It's just human. And you can continue it's a lifelong process to grow and work on yourself. And it's thrilling as you get to know yourself in ever deepening ways. The type of therapy that I do is called Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy, AEDP. It was developed by Diana Fosha. She's brilliant. And she really synthesized the body of academic knowledge and developed a model that is so loving and beautiful and scientific and works that and there are AEDP therapists, definitely in the Bay Area, California, New York, the major cities it's concentrated, but people are doing this type of therapy over Zoom. And I just, having been trained in lots of different modalities, because I'm one of those people that needs to learn everything, this is just a great these therapists who work this way have the attachment and connection piece, the authentic piece. They're flexible, they're integrative, and they know how to work with emotions and thoughts. And you really want to find a therapist that understands about working with emotions in the body, because that's how you heal. It's really how you heal, not only gain insight. And you can heal the brain because the brain is movable. We now know. It's used to think that we were just solid by the time you were like 20, and now we know you
Hilary,
can.
I wish we had time to keep talking for hours, because there's so many things I didn't get to talk about, because you and I are aligned in so many different ways in how we approach our work and our passion within that. So I'm really appreciative of everything that you shared today, and thank you for those resources. I think this is a perfect time. We need to be hearing it, and even if you've heard it before, hear it again, because we always need the reminders.
Yes.
And it's never a one and done, right? We're always evolving and growing, and maybe we heard some of these tools at one point and now something new is coming up. So maybe we resonate with something different each time we get, reminders of how to work with our emotions and our thoughts and whatever's arising. So again, thank you so much for your
so
time
welcome
today. And it's really been a pleasure talking with you. And I hope to continue the conversation again, because I think this is something that so many people need a lot of tools around. So
I
thank you
totally
for the
agree.
work that you're doing, and I'm really happy to support it.
Thank you. And thank you, all of you out there. I just want to say, hang in there. All of this is temporary. You matter, your feelings matter. And here's to lifelong working on ourselves to feel more and more kind of in control, and a sense that we can get through no matter what life hits us. Yeah.
Wait to worry.
Yeah.
Live in the present and
breathe.
breathe. All right. Thanks, Hilary.
Take care.